Hello and welcome to the John Ark Show. On today's episode, we're going to interview Simon Brown. He's the president of PlatinumFighters.com. This company is one of the largest brokers for the sale of older military aircraft to the private sector in the United States. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to subscribe, like, comment, and follow us. Also, I'd like to tell you about a service called HollywoodIsCalling.com. It's a great service that allows you to purchase live phone calls from your favorite celebrities, so check them out. It's something you can buy for yourself or as a gift for someone you love. Now, let's say hello to Simon. Hello, Simon, and welcome to the John Ark Show. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. How are you doing?
Good, my pleasure. So, I suspect that many people don't realize that as a private citizen, you can purchase a used military jet. And of course, that is what your company, PlatinumFighters.com, makes possible. Can you tell us a bit about the company, when you started it, and what your role there is?
Sure. Okay, so Platinum Fighter Sales, myself and a business partner started this 12 years ago. He and I actually worked for another company. I left, he came with me, and we started Platinum Fighter Sales in 2008. Basically, what we do, buy and sell, trade vintage aircraft, everything from 1920s and 30s classic airplanes. Primarily, most of our business is World War II fighters, but then we do some more modern airplanes up through about the 50s and 60s.
So what are the price ranges for the purchase of used military planes? Where do they start out at, and what's considered the high end for a used military plane?
Okay, different types of airplanes. We're going to go anywhere on a used military airplane from a trainer from about 150, 175,000 up through some of the more rare and valuable fighters that are north of $10 million.
Gotcha. So does one require a special license or special training to fly a military aircraft, or will a conventional pilot's license suffice?
So in a lot of cases, a regular pilot's license is going to suffice. If, depending on how the airplane's licensed, if it's registered what they call experimental, then you're going to require a special rating. Or if the plane's over a certain weight, which is 12,500 pounds, you're going to require a special rating as well. Certain airplanes, trainers, P-51s, which is probably the most famous of the World War II airplanes, just you can fly those with a regular private pilot's license. You're going to require training though. So, there's special schools that people go to receive the training. And that's pretty much a requirement now from the insurance companies. No one's going to insure you unless you get signed off, at some of these schools for the required training.
So we see that one of the planes that Platinum Fighters has for sale is the McDonnell F4 Phantom II. Now that's a plane that as a child, I built a kit for. So I've always loved the look of that plane. And I see that you guys are selling one for $3.25 million. Now, your ad says that this is the only Phantom II in the world that is capable of flight. That sort of surprises me because I know that there were a lot of those planes in use back in during the Vietnam War. So how did you guys find a plane like this?
Okay, so this particular aircraft is actually the only one in civilian ownership capable.
Okay.
It's a long story, but the government obviously doesn't want average people running around in aircraft that are capable of, possibly carrying, certain weapons. This particular airplane went through the system, was legally stricken from the military, when ended up in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Went through a couple owners, and that's how it legally became to be a civilian-owned airplane that's being returned to airworthy condition. So it's kind of a special one in that regard. There are some other Phantoms that are flying, but they're actually not privately owned.
Gotcha. So you're saying it's been demilitarized?
Well, demilitarized. There's no weapons on board, so yes.
Okay.
Demilitarized in that sense, but when you typically see that term demilitarized, it means they cut the wings, so that it's not airworthy. This airplane has not had that done to it.
Oh, I see. I thought demilitarized meant you simply remove the weapons.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's de-weaponized, but not
Okay.
the structure hasn't been altered.
Okay. Do you guys purchase these planes and then resell them, or do the owners simply post them on your site and sell them through you?
Once in a while, we'll buy an airplane to flip, basically. But most of the aircraft that we deal with are brokered through us. We're kind of like a real estate agent in that sense. Someone lists it with us, we advertise it, market it, and sell it, and then put together a complete package for the buyer. This is a lot of these guys are coming in for the first time buying an airplane, and they're not really sure what to do, how to do it. So we set them up with everything through the right inspectors, the right maintenance facilities. We coordinate the insurance for them, whatever needs to be done, the right pilot training.
So are the monthly maintenance costs for a used military plane significantly higher or different than the monthly maintenance costs for a comparable civilian plane?
For the most part, no. The two things that are going to be different, one, the insurance is probably going to be more. And then the second thing is spare parts. If you have a regular civilian airplane and you break a part, you can call up a manufacturer in most cases and get a replacement part, FedExed over, whatever needs to be done. We're to the point now with these old airplanes, parts have dried up. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. 30 years ago, if we broke a part, we were able to just buy, a replacement part. Now it's having to manufacture a part. So there's a cottage industry that manufactures these new parts, but sometimes they're not available. I mean, we might have a plane down on the ground for, 3, 4, 6 months waiting for a part on occasion.
Wow.
Yeah.
There are now 3D printers which print in metal and metal alloys. Have you guys ever thought about purchasing a printer and hiring an engineer to create your own spare parts when they become necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been thought of and considered. The major issue that we're going to have with that is that the parts have to be certified.
Gotcha.
So getting the FAA to step in and allow that and certify, that's something that they're talking about and working on. I'm not 100% sure how far along they are on that, but for now we're just going with typical machining processes.
So if I have a plane that I want to sell through your company, do you charge a flat fee? Do you charge a percentage? What is the process?
It's a percentage that's got a cap on it.
Okay. And does the buyer or the seller pay that percentage?
Usually it's a seller.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have another extraordinary plane called the XP-82, which I've never seen before. I've seen plenty of P-51, P-51s, but the XP-82 appears to be constructed out of two P-51s fused together. It looks amazing. I also see that it took years to restore that plane, and it's being sold through your company for $12 million. What can you tell me about this incredible plane? It looks difficult to fly, is it?
I've spoken extensively with the pilot. I don't think it's that difficult to fly. Mm-hmm. It's just a little unique in the fact that the pilot is so far off the center line. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I mean, it's not going to be that much different than flying any of the other World War II airplanes. It's a magnificent airplane. It's down in Florida. I just went down there last week we pulled the airplane apart and looked at it and inspected it and did everything. And I was just absolutely blown away by the quality of it. This airplane, they only made a couple hundred of them. It was in that period between World War II and Korea. It kind of got lost when in the early jet age. Everyone was so excited about jets that some of these great piston engine airplanes kind of faded away way before their time. This is one of those aircraft. So there's only 5 of them left, 2 in private hands. There's this one, which is flyable. There's another one, which is in a under restoration up in Minnesota with a gentleman. 200,000 man hours. This guy found the airplane. Basically, it was in a derelict condition up in just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. A gentleman had the plane and there was half an airplane. I mean, half of this airplane is scratch built, and half of it is original and has been restored. But probably the most complex airplane I've ever seen as far as a restoration. A guy named Tom Riley owns it and did the restoration, and it's just amazing.
So tell me about the process of restoring these old planes. Is that a viable business model? I think I read that the guy who did the XP-82, it took him what, a dozen years or something like that.
A dozen years, 207,000 man hours.
Wow! And does he have to machine his own parts?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So yes, I mean there is a pretty good industry for restoring World War II airplanes all around the world. And there's restoration shops in Australia, New Zealand, United States, England. There's a very good market for restoring these airplanes all across the world, and it's been going on for 50 years now. These airplanes are 80 years old, but in the 70s they really started to restore them. They take derelict airplanes and just build them up and fly them. Back in the day when they started, it wasn't cost effective, so people were patching airplanes and not going through 100% restoration. Now you can take an old derelict airplane, go through a restoration, spend millions of dollars in some cases restoring them, and then when you go to sell it, you're going to get your money out in most cases. So it's definitely a viable proposition from a financial standpoint.
So does the government have to check it and certify it before it's put on the market? Do you have to test it to make sure it's going to fly?
The FAA has to come out and inspect it. Okay. So just like they would any civilian airplane. So we go through exactly the same process. You get an airworthiness certificate. There's test flying involved. Very, very similar.
Interesting. So you also have another conventional P-51 Mustang for sale for $2.5 million. Correct. And this has to be one of the most beautiful planes out of World War II. And also one of the fastest, barring the introduction of the German jets towards the end of the war.
Correct.
Is it true that these planes are going up in value?
Absolutely. One of the questions that I get asked all the time is, if I buy this airplane, is it going to go up in value? We can't predict the future, of course, but I can tell you this. Over the last 40 years, pretty much across the board, the aircraft have doubled in value every 10 years. Yeah. So, a 250,000, 10 years later became a $500,000 plane, became $1 million, became a $2 million, and so on. So, and I don't see that trend slowing down at all.
So do you think that price appreciation model is going to continue on the same path, or will it increase, or is it difficult to say?
Well, it's difficult to say. There's no indication that it's gonna change, though. Mm-hmm. What has changed over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years has been the buyers. When we got into this business 20 odd years ago, the buyers were pilots. People wanted these planes because, to fly them. Now it's almost, I don't want to say it strictly, but a huge portion of this business is investors. People are buying airplanes, putting them into collections. They're investing into them like art. We've been helping one collector form a collection of aircraft. He's got them on display under lights, just like you would an art collection or a car collection.
So we have a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs. We have a lot of investors, a lot of hedge fund guys in our audience. Are your buyers, are the hedge funds, are they corporate entities, or are they individuals who just love these things and want to invest in them as opposed to an alternative asset class?
Yeah, for the most part, it's individuals.
Okay.
CEOs, owners of companies, so forth. And what has happened in many cases, these guys have been heavily invested in the collector cars. Right. And everyone that's come to us has felt that the collector car market is kind of topped out. So they saw some real value in some vintage airplanes, specifically World War II fighters. They're buying those, with the hopes of them appreciating. A lot of the guys that we're selling to are not pilots, and they'll have a pilot that'll come and fly the airplane. They'll have them maintained, serviced, whatever needs to be done. But it's an appreciating asset that they're going to buy now and then sell in 10 years for for a profit.
So, do you think, as an asset class, do you think that there are more antique cars out in the marketplace or more antique military aircraft?
Oh, there's definitely more cars.
That's what I think too. That's why I think this is a more valuable asset class to invest in because the population is smaller.
Yes, correct. There's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 vintage airplanes of all different types. Ex-military airplanes. You get to the World War II fighters, which is obviously the most sought after and desirable from a financial perspective. There's probably 1,000 of those. So, I mean, you can go to some of these car auctions and they sell thousands of cars in a weekend or, a week or whatever. So it's a very small industry in that regard.
And I'll tell you something else that strikes me as very interesting in this day and age. And that is when you purchase art, when you purchase a Van Gogh, when you purchase any kind of high dollar art, there is now a growing probability that despite having been appraised and evaluated by an expert or two, that it still may be counterfeit, that it still may be a fake. And because of this, a lot of expert appraisers are now refusing to appraise art because the techniques and technology used to create counterfeits is so sophisticated that it's dangerous for them to certify it. However, with used military aircraft, that's not the case. If you're buying an old P-51 Mustang, there is nobody in China or in Eastern Europe that is cranking out fake P-51s, to my knowledge. So I think as an asset class, this would add tremendous value and peace of mind to this asset class for future investors. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are to the point where if we find a damaged airplane, we can pretty much recreate every part on it. So in theory, you could actually recreate one if you had to. But there are enough real airplanes still out there that, and the FAA is not looking lightly on people taking an identity and putting them on a new airframe at the moment.
Right. So what is the key? Is it the airframe, the core airframe that makes it legit? What can you add later, and what do you have to have preserved from the original in order for this to be an actual plane?
Basically, it's a very fine line. As far as the FAA is concerned, which is the governing body for aviation, you just need the data plate. It's the ownership, so you have to have continuous ownership on these things. Now, the reality is that most airplanes, come with a certain amount of original parts. There are some of these more rare airplanes that are being rebuilt. Some of them may have 60, 70, 80% new parts on them.
Right.
And that's all documented. And of course, if we're buying or selling an airplane, it's very transparent of what's original and what isn't.
And, and that's to be expected, given that some of these planes may be 50 or 60 years old. There's going to be wear and tear parts.
80 years old in some of these cases, yeah.
So when you say continuous ownership, are you talking about a provenance traceable back to the original factory information?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so you can trace the ownership back. Is that an FAA record, or is that?
Yes, there's FAA records, but there's also private ownership records. And each aircraft will come with a set of logbooks, a package of ownership records, where we can actually go back and trace, in many cases, the airplane, who owned it, where it was based, who the mechanics are. We just recently sold an airplane, a PBY Catalina, which is a big World War II flying boat. And very, very unique. There's only maybe less than a dozen of them flying in the world. And we had a box of the original records. We had the original flight test records from 1942. We actually had the records going back as far as who did who did the first oil changes on the airplane in the Navy back in, 42 or 43, and all the way down. There was boxes and boxes and boxes of records that went with this airplane, 70 something years of history.
So I have heard, and you can confirm this if you know, I have heard that if you are purchasing a plane, if you're acquiring a plane and it doesn't have the logs, it can be worth its value, its market value can be decreased by as much as a third. Is that true?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And there's certain things to look at. You can recreate logbooks, but if you're going to license an airplane and you don't have the logbooks, everything has to be gone through and recertified. That's the big financial consideration.
So I'm assuming that's a very expensive process.
It can be, yes.
Okay. So I see that you also have a Douglas DC-3, which was, a huge production plane back in the day. And you're selling it for, I think, $290,000.
Correct.
I know that these planes were made, over a large number of years. Is this plane, it's, what is it, 80 years old? Is a plane like that still airworthy and flyable?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, the gentleman who owns that particular airplane, I talked to him just 2 days ago. They flew it on the weekend, giving some rides.
Mhm.
And we have a client in Europe who's interested in that airplane. So one of the things that we're working on today is actually coming up with a cost analysis and a route to take the airplane over to Europe.
Hmm. So, what are the maintenance costs on an 80-year-old plane compared to the maintenance costs on a 20-year-old plane? Is there a huge difference?
Certain things, yes, absolutely. Engines and propellers are going to be way more expensive. Replacement parts are way more expensive. We're talking, something for a P-51, $250,000 for a new engine.
Mhm.
Propellers are going for 150,000, 160,000, something like that. The actual labor, we're going to pay the same amount for a mechanic to work on the airplane per hour as you would for a new airplane.
Hmm.
It's going to burn the same amount of fuel as some of the modern airplanes. So those costs are going to be the same. Replacement parts and then insurance are going to be the two things that are more expensive.
Gotcha. So I see that you have a number of beautiful seaplanes from the 40s and 50s for sale. One of them is the 1959 HU-16B Albatross. It's an
Yeah,
incredible looking plane, but once again, I see that it's being sold for $299,000.
correct.
Um, is that plane, what do you think about the market price trend of a plane like that? Will that continue to increase, or do you think it's going to start going down in price over time?
I don't think it's going to go down at all in value, but seaplanes in particular, there's a very small market. For every 10 buyers that we would have for a P-51 or a land-based airplane, we're going to only have maybe one buyer for a seaplane.
Mm.
So it's a victim of such a small marketplace. And a plane like that, it's a big airplane, and the maintenance is going to be difficult on it operating. You need a small army to maintain and operate something like that,
Right.
which it's going to hurt the airplane a little bit.
So, does a seaplane require a special kind of pilot's license or training to fly it, or can a conventional pilot get in and take off?
You have to get a seaplane rating, so you have to get a seaplane addition to your pilot's license. So that's something that has to be done with a plane like the Albatross. It's going to require something called a type rating because it's over 12,500 pounds.
Hmm.
And also you would have to have in this case a seaplane multi-engine rating because it's obviously got two engines.
Hmm. So let's go through the process of purchasing one of your planes. Let's assume someone in our audience likes one of your planes and decides to buy it. Walk me through the process of acquiring a $12 million XP-82.
Okay, very simple. It's going to be very similar to buying a house. A price is agreed upon, a deposit is made to take it off the market, and then the due diligence starts. We'll either bring the owner and his mechanics to the airplane or bring the airplane to a neutral maintenance shop, whatever required to do the physical inspection on the aircraft. Everyone will supply all the records, the history on the airplane, whatever is required in this case. Once it passes the inspection, one of the big things that we have is a consideration is taxes in this country.
Hmm.
And depending, if you have a buyer in California and a plane in some other state, we might deliver the plane in a neutral site to avoid sales tax. Sales tax is usually dependent on where the transaction takes place. So there's a consideration. Sales tax on $12 million could get pretty pricey for someone. So we'll make sure that we do it legally and to do it in a tax friendly jurisdiction.
Right.
and then deliver the airplane and then close the deal, whatever needs to be done.
So start to finish, how long is the average process for acquiring a plane?
Typically 30 days.
30. That's not too bad.
No,
That's including all the inspections and everything.
Yes, correct.
Okay. What's the most expensive plane you guys have ever sold?
That actually is confidential to the number because we signed a confidentiality agreement, but in the neighborhood of $10 million.
Okay. And how large do you think the worldwide market for used military aircraft is?
It's good. There's like I said, there's probably different types of World War II airplanes, 3,000 or 4,000. Maybe 1,000 fighters, something like that. We are getting to the point though that we're seeing, there's certain airplanes that we've sold time and time again. There's one P-51. I've actually sold that airplane 4 times. Mm-hmm. There's another P-51 my business partner sold, I think, 4 times. We've had a Corsair sell 3 times. We've had a Bearcat sell 3 times. So especially when you get into that, the upper echelon of the fighters, there's very few airplanes. There's a lot more demand than there are aircraft. So we're selling these same airplanes over and over again.
So is there any kind of government approval process needed to sell a used military aircraft to an overseas client?
Typically, no. If it's about 1956, I think it is. If it's a World War II airplane, no, or older. Jets, absolutely. There are regulations, ITAR, International Trade and Regulation, Arms Regulation, that some of these airplanes, like an F-4 Phantom, would be subject to. So that airplane, I don't think would ever see a viable sale overseas.
Interesting. So let's say I find a beautiful plane on your site, or one of our viewers does.
Yes.
But the seller and the plane are located overseas. I imagine that happens occasionally, right?
Absolutely.
So, and let's say they want to purchase it. How can that buyer be assured that this is a legitimately owned aircraft and it just wasn't stolen from some Nigerian airport half an hour ago? How do they know they're taking a legitimate delivery of a legitimate aircraft for their money?
Okay, so all aircraft are registered, whether it's in the United States or in Canada, Germany, wherever it's going to be. Basically, we're going to work, our FAA is going to work with, or our escrow company is working with the FAA, who's going to work with that foreign government to deregister the airplane legally, which in doing that, they have to prove ownership. Bring it to the United States in this case, and then re-register it and relicense it. So there's a continuous chain of ownership, which is legally blessed by the foreign government plus our government.
So I'm assuming that lengthens the purchase process by what, a couple of months?
No, not at all. We actually just finished a deal on Friday where we're taking a P-51 that's in Germany and shipping it to Canada. So we're to the point, it might add a week to the process. So
a plane that is shipped transnationally, is that shipped typically by boat? Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically in a 40-foot container. And what we'll do is we'll take an airplane, we'll have the propeller, the wings, the tail taken off. They'll build metal stands to support everything, put everything in a 40-foot container, and then we'll ship it from country A to country B.
So what would it cost to ship a P-51 from, say, France to the United States? Just on average.
The actual shipping is going to be something like $12,000 to $15,000 door to door, and then probably another $20,000 by the time you take it apart and reassemble and license it. Okay. So let's say from the time it's flying in France to the time it's flying in the United States, it's probably realistically going to cost $30,000, $35,000, something like that.
Do you guys sell a lot of older military jet aircraft, or is it predominantly propeller planes?
It's predominantly propeller piston engine airplanes. Big reason is the value. Most of the airplanes, with the proper training, you or I could fly piston engine airplanes. The jets, they're a little fast. They're a lot faster in many cases. They're not as reliable, and there's not as many because of it. Plus the fuel burn. Some of these modern jets are 500, 600, 800 gallons an hour of fuel, and that becomes pretty cost ineffective at that point.
So if I were to take a P-51 Mustang up for an hour or so, what would the fuel burn on something like that cost on average?
Oh, for an hour, your first hour, including takeoff and climb out, is probably 70 gallons an hour,
Okay.
and then just cruising, it's about 60 gallons an hour.
So let's assume somebody's a novice. They've never owned a military aircraft, but they're thinking of investing. What are some of the challenges and the problems that people encounter in owning and maintaining an older military aircraft? Is it insurance? Is it fuel? What are they usually surprised by?
Probably the biggest thing, like we mentioned earlier, are the spare parts.
Okay.
Tracking spare parts down, that's always something that people aren't really anticipating. And then secondly, storage. Obviously these planes require a hangar to live in, and a lot of hangars in a lot of places are not readily available these days. So people aren't exactly being able to keep airplanes down at their home airport. Basically, they're being stored elsewhere, and they're traveling to see the airplanes in a lot of cases.
Does somebody need a pilot's license to purchase an aircraft from you guys, or
No.
do they simply need a check that clears?
You need a check that clears. You don't need a pilot license to fly it. You do, obviously, but not to own it. Ownership is totally different. You have to either be in the United States, in order to have a plane that's on the U.S. register, you have to either be a U.S. citizen, or if you're not a U.S. citizen, then you have an LLC or a trust own it. That's a U.S. Based company with it, or a trust.
What are the most popular military planes that you sell?
Probably the P-51 is, obviously by volume, there's about 170 of them in the world that are flying. That's the number one airplane. Probably the number two is the British Spitfire. There's about 60 of those flying. And I think over the years, between my partner and myself, I think we've sold maybe 14 or 15 out of 60. So, percentage-wise, we've sold quite a few of those.
So the government has recently mandated an avionics upgrade for private jets. It's the Adsb avionics upgrade.
Yes.
Does that same requirement apply to older military jets?
Absolutely, yes.
So if I buy a Phantom 2 and it doesn't have the new avionics, I'll have to have it upgraded, I'm assuming then?
Correct, yes. Yeah, and that's not just jets, it's piston engine airplanes. So, a P-51 or a T-6, anything that has an electrical system basically is going to require Adsb.
What do you estimate the cost of that upgrade to be?
You can do it as cheaply as about 20. We've just done a couple. We did one for 2,500, and then we're just having one done in a P-51 right now, and that's about 7,000.
I was going to ask you this question, but now I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyways.
Sure.
What do you think is a better business investment, a yacht or a used military fighter?
I don't know the first thing about yachts, to be honest with you, but I can tell you this. The Warbirds it's been a great business to be in. The planes have appreciated. They have history. There's obviously a lot of people who like them for their history. Like I said, they've doubled on average, they've doubled in value every 10 years. So it's definitely a good market to be in.
Yeah, you cannot say the same thing about yachts. Yachts are going in the opposite direction.
Right.
We see some companies out there that are selling used Russian MiG-29 fighters for about $4.5 million.
Yes.
What do you think of these supersonic Russian fighters? Would that be a wise investment, or is that just a new toy for a billionaire this week?
It's going to be a good investment if you can buy the airplane, get it into the country, and get it licensed. Which there's a lot of hurdles to get through. If you can do that, then it's a great investment. There's a couple of them that have been in the U.S. and have sold, and people have actually made money selling them. One of the other things with ex-military airplanes that's really big business these days is putting them on government contracts. So whether it's a MiG-29 or some of these guys have A4 Skyhawks or some of these other 1950s, 60s airplanes, F5s, they're putting them on government contracts and they're making a fortune doing it.
I'm also seeing a lot of Blackhawks on the market. Do you guys sell helicopters as well?
We do not typically. We have some friends that have some very successful helicopter businesses, and usually we'll refer or defer to those guys.
Right. So before we wrap things up, is there anything else you would like to promote? Do you have any extraordinary planes coming on the market soon, or anything that you would like to bring attention to?
We have a few really cool airplanes coming up in the very near future. We have a couple of new Spitfires that are going to come into the market. We've got another Corsair that's coming in the market. We have another P-51 that's coming into the market. So, we've had a tremendous year this year. We've sold basically 200% of our normal sales, basically since COVID started. So, I mean, we've sold 25 airplanes since April, which has been fantastic for us. A little unexpected, but the planes aren't lasting that long these days in inventory.
Yeah, well, I predict nothing but the best for the future of your company for the reasons that we discussed. I think the marketplace is starting to lose faith in some of the other asset classes, like high-end art, for example, or the stock market, and I see a flight to what is probably going to be a higher appreciating asset class, like used fighter jets or used fighter planes. So I see a bright future for you guys. Well, listen, it has been a pleasure having you on the John Ark Show, and you guys are always welcome back. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you very much.